In this shocking episode, the FBI reveals startling evidence found at Rick Harrison's mansion. What dark secrets is the famous Pawn Stars owner hiding? From secret documents to evidence that could change everything, what's about to be uncovered is truly mind-blowing. Get ready to learn details you never imagined about one of the most famous personalities on TV. Don't miss out. Attention Pawn Stars fans. Have you ever wondered what dark secrets might be hidden in Rick Harrison's mansion? Leave a comment below with what you think could be discovered, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe so you don't miss the truth behind it all. Let's uncover the mysteries together. For over a decade, Rick Harrison has been the ideal father figure that many dream of having. He is a symbol of charm, wisdom, and integrity in the eyes of the public. However, a nightmare is lurking, and the perfect image he has built over the years may just be a facade. Tonight, the country waits in silence for the testimony of his adopted daughter, who is about to reveal a secret that could destroy his reputation and uncover one of the darkest truths ever hidden behind the spotlight. The courtroom is cold, its white lights casting down on the gleaming marble floor. Every step taken by those present echoes like thunder in the terrifying silence, as if a historic verdict is about to be delivered. Camera lenses focus on one man alone, Rick Harrison. Dressed in dark attire, he sits there, not the familiar face seen on the small screen, but a man now facing a turbulent storm. Not far away, his son, Cury, sits with his head lowered, saying nothing. The young man seems trapped in an internal conflict, a pain too deep to put into words. Though the faces of the jury show no emotion, it's clear they are waiting for something, a decisive moment they know will change everything. Suddenly, the side door of the courtroom swings open, and a young woman steps in. She's only 24, but her eyes radiate strength, determination, and a deep sadness. She is Rick Harrison's adopted daughter, a person whose existence has remained largely unknown for over a decade. Today she stands before the public, sitting right in front of the microphone, her hands trembling, her breath heavy, as if she's carrying a burden too immense to undo. The courtroom remains silent for a few moments, and then the judge calls for absolute quiet. Suddenly, the adopted daughter speaks words that could change everything. Her testimony is not just an accusation. It's an emotional bombshell that shatters the entire facade of the Harrison legend. The image of the perfect father, the upright businessman, begins to crack before the public's eyes. Those who have always admired him, unaware of the dark secrets hidden behind closed doors. At this moment, those present in the courtroom can no longer contain their emotions. Some are in tears, while others can only bow their heads, unable to bear the weight of the moment's pain. Rick Harrison, once a pillar of strength, now cannot hide his fear. A family, a television empire, is facing collapse right before their eyes. The story of Rick Harrison, from a perfect role model to a man confronting shocking testimonies, is only just beginning. The silence envelops the room as the young woman takes a deep breath and begins to tell a story that no one in the room is prepared to hear. Her testimony is not merely a story, but a psychological surgery, a journey through the deep wounds under the name Harrison. She recounts being adopted at the age of 6, presented to the public as a generous act by the Harrison family. On the surface, everything seemed perfect. A new life, a stable family, a home full of opportunities. But it was all just a facade, hiding the truth behind the walls of luxury and the display cases of history. She reveals that from the very beginning, she lived within a system of control disguised as protection. Rick Harrison monitored every aspect of her daily life, from what she ate, what she wore, to the people she interacted with. He made her believe that she would forever owe him, that without him, she would become worthless. Gradually, gratitude turned into an emotional cage, forcing her to accept manipulation. Sweet yet toxic words began to seep into her mind. "You have no one but me. If you talk to anyone, people will hate you." Illogical gestures began to become routine. The abuse didn't happen all at once. It was a gradual process, cruel and systematic. Those who tried to reveal the truth were met with cold silence or subtle threats. "Do you want to go back to the foster care system? No one will believe you against the great Rick Harrison." And so, she lived in a prison of fear, where everything was pretended to be perfect. At school, she learned to smile, while at home, she only knew how to exist in silence. Her voice had slowly been shattered by the very environment that was supposed to protect her. One sleepless night, as she watched an old clip from the show on her phone, where Rick Harrison spoke about the importance of truth and the value of authentic stories, a turning point occurred. In that moment, with tears in her eyes, something inside her sparked. She decided to speak out, not for revenge, but for freedom, for justice, not just for herself, but for the countless invisible girls like her. The internal struggle to escape fear and rebuild her life was long and painful. However, on that afternoon in the courtroom, for the first time in her life, she was no longer the shadow hidden behind the name Harrison. She was the voice, the witness, the truth. Before the jury and under the pressure from the judge, nothing was the same anymore. Her testimony shook the courtroom, but what happened afterward left an indelible mark that could never be erased. The prosecution presented a series of powerful physical evidence, affirming that the accusations were not without merit. A pattern of ongoing abuse had been meticulously recorded and stored. First were the audio recordings from an old mobile phone, in which conversations between Rick Harrison and another person were heard, with a tone that clearly coerced a minor. These voices were verified by forensic experts as authentic. Each word directly contradicted the public narrative that Rick Harrison had maintained for years. Next came the personal diaries that the young woman had written from the age of 9 to 17. Disjointed words, disturbing drawings, and indirect metaphors all pointed to a process of trauma and suppression. Clinical psychologists confirmed that these texts aligned with a pattern of systematic child abuse. But that wasn't all. Two former employees who had worked for the family, a maid and a tutor, decided to break their silence. Their testimonies matched the horrifying details: restricted areas in the house, screams at night, and the complete isolation of the young woman. The final report, supported by technological analysis and psychological assessments, left no room for doubt. What the young woman said was not only verifiable, but far more brutal than anything this trial could fully reveal. Her story not only implicated Rick Harrison, but also reflected a larger system, one that protected, sheltered, and elevated him into an icon for many years. This was a verdict not just against an individual, but against an entire television industry that had nurtured his image, transforming him into a larger-than-life figure in the eyes of the public. The image of Rick Harrison, tied to family history and hard work, had been carefully crafted by the producers of Pawn Stars. Every detail of his life was presented as an engaging story, a symbol of success, and this narrative was so successful that millions of viewers never questioned it. However, the television networks and executives remained silent, distancing themselves from the unbelievable stories about Rick Harrison. Sponsors quickly severed ties as the truth began to surface. The trial not only exposed personal secrets but also revealed a deeper truth, a culture of silence, where victims are forced to remain quiet, doubt themselves, and believe no one will ever believe them. The courtroom became a symbolic stage for a larger struggle, the collapse of an official narrative and the rise of a hidden truth. The prosecution not only destroyed Rick Harrison's public image but also forced us to confront difficult questions. What responsibility do those who know but remain silent bear? How blind are audiences to the allure of fame? And most importantly, how many people like Rick Harrison, hidden behind the spotlight, are living a life of deception? That day in court, the trial became a collective cry. Enough! It was not only aimed at the defendant, but also at an industry that chose silence over losing its star. To understand the full extent of the scandal, we must look back to the beginning of Rick Harrison's career. As a teenager growing up in the suburbs of Las Vegas in the mid-'80s, facing financial struggles, academic failure, and epilepsy, Rick was far from the typical American hero. Yet, it was this story of overcoming adversity that became the foundation for the image he would later build. Rick's father, Richard Oldman Harrison, opened a modest pawn shop in 1989, Gold and Silver Pawn Shop. Rick joined the family business at a young age and quickly proved his skills in negotiation, detecting counterfeits, and, most notably, storytelling that sold. This talent led him to bigger opportunities, including a meeting with executives from the History Channel, where he pitched a simple but effective idea: showcase daily life at the shop as a living history show. And so, Pawn Stars was born in 2009, a television phenomenon that not only captivated millions of viewers in the U.S., but was also exported to over 150 countries, becoming one of the channel's most profitable franchises. In what seemed like sheer spontaneity, Rick Harrison cleverly crafted a flawless brand image, not just as a smart and fair man, but as a satirical anti-hero. His shop became more than just a family business. It transformed into a tourist attraction. His face began appearing on t-shirts, keychains, and official merchandise. Rick wasn't just selling antiques. He was selling confidence, inspiration at a media level. He became the embodiment of the American dream, a self-made man who overcame hardship to achieve success. His story was told in documentaries, interviews, and inspirational books. He was invited to business conferences, universities, and patriotic events. And while society wanted to believe in him, he knew how to nurture that belief. However, today's trial reveals that this carefully crafted public image is not the full story. While the world admired his wit and humor, behind closed doors was a very different reality. A web of control, silence, and systematic abuse allegations is being woven. The contradiction between what the public witnessed and what transpired privately within the Harrison empire is at the heart of the case. This is not just the downfall of a celebrity, it is the collapse of an icon. The trial not only exposes the crimes, but also the emotional manipulation that allowed this empire to grow unchecked for over a decade. The crucial question millions of viewers are now asking is, how much of what we admired was truly real. Everything society viewed as the traits of an attractive man, a model of self-improvement, and a father on television was completely different when the investigation revealed another version of Rick Harrison. A relentless controller, a master of psychological manipulation, and the central figure in a carefully constructed system of abuse behind the scenes. According to statements from those involved, Rick was not only strict, but also extremely authoritarian. Everything in the house had to follow his rules, from how things were arranged to meal times. However, the darkest form of control he exercised was over his adopted daughter. The young woman describes the years she lived under Rick's subtle yet constant control. He disguised this possession as protection, making her believe that his isolation of her was for her own good. He made her believe that the outside world was dangerous and that no one else could love or care for her the way he did. The gifts, sweet words, and promises of a bright future became invisible chains. She was forbidden from freely communicating with friends, unable to use social media without supervision, and every conversation outside had to be monitored. Gradually, her world shrank to the four walls where Rick was the judge, the guide, and the executioner. The most devastating turning point in the case came from the involvement of Cury Harrison, Rick's biological son. Up until that point, Cury had been seen as a passive figure in this environment. But during the trial, the adopted daughter directly labeled him as an active accomplice. She confirmed that it wasn't just one person. They took turns. Messages retrieved from Rick and Cury's electronic devices showed they had discussed the young woman's behavior and how to manage it, which shocked the court. Although the language was somewhat vague, experts on juvenile sexual crimes identified this as a form of complicity and mutual domination. The control was not only physical but also emotional, mental, and symbolic, especially whenever the young woman tried to express herself. Rick Harrison reinforced the narrative that without him, she was nothing. He made her feel guilty, constantly reminding her of the sacrifices he had made for her, and using abandonment as a frequent threat. A particularly shocking testimony emerged when she recounted a birthday when Rick gave her a locked diary but kept the key. When she wrote down her private thoughts, he read them aloud during family meetings to teach her how to think properly. This was a humiliation disguised as correction, a chilling game in which the victim was shaped in the image of the abuser. Forensic psychologists analyzed the case and spoke about a self-absorbed, closed environment where Rick played the role of an absolute son. Everyone revolved around him, including Cury, his son, whose involvement, according to assessments, was marked by submission and imitation. Rick Harrison's double life went far beyond his public persona. It was an internal system built on complete control, a prison without bars constructed from charm, fame, and fear. What was concerning was not the randomness, but the intent behind it. This discovery turned the case into something larger than a scandal. It reflected a society that often confuses power with integrity and allure with innocence. Throughout the trial, Rick Harrison's adopted daughter recounted her entire life. A life filled with trauma, manipulation, and pain, but also with resilience and an awakening within. She described her adolescence as a time of total isolation. Though she never lacked food, clothing, or shelter, she was deprived of affection, freedom, and recognition. She shared that Rick knew exactly what to show the world. A photo at Disneyland, a smile on her face, an expensive Christmas gift, all part of the spectacle. But when alone, she lived by arbitrary rules, enduring constant humiliation and punishment, swinging between contempt and emotional deprivation. She spoke of sleepless nights, with double-locked doors, security cameras pointed at her room, and the constant feeling of being watched. Though she tried to run away at the age of 16, the police brought her back. Rick had learned to turn the law into an ally and the child protection system into another threat to silence her. She said she wasn't beaten. She endured something far worse: utter indifference. He wouldn't speak to her, wouldn't look at her. She felt as though she didn't exist. Choking back tears, she said that this indifference had killed her more than any other abuse. The young woman had recorded audio from the cameras she managed to evade during those moments of feigned privacy. She even had video of herself recounting things she couldn't share with anyone else. "This is how I'm speaking to my future self. You're not crazy, this happened, and one day you will speak out." The court was moved when listening to those recordings, especially one where she was just 12, whispering softly into the camera. As the young woman finished her testimony, she no longer trembled but stood tall, her gaze unwavering. She didn't beg for forgiveness for speaking the truth, nor did she seek pity. She only asked that her voice not be ignored as it had been so many times before. "I am not just Rick Harrison's adopted daughter. I am a human being, and today I am free," she declared. When she finished, a spontaneous round of applause erupted in the courtroom, only to be immediately silenced by the judge's gavel. That moment became symbolic, not just the climax of a legal process, but an act of transformation from a silenced victim to a survivor empowered. It was a message sent to all the voices of children still silenced by fear, shame, or lack of evidence. It was living proof that silence can be broken, and when it is, it will destroy everything that sustains it. Immediately, Rick Harrison's shadow was no longer the center of attention. All the power and truth now belonged to her. The invisible shadow had finally turned into light as the truth began to be recognized. It wasn't just the abuser who fell, but the structures protecting him, the silence surrounding him, and the relationships that supported him were also crumbling. What happened after the adopted daughter's full testimony was not just a blow to Rick Harrison's public image, but the complete collapse of the family nucleus that had long been considered a symbol of unity, effort, and American tradition. The first cracks appeared when Adam Harrison, Rick's eldest son, unexpectedly stepped into the public eye. Adam, who had always been on the fringes of the family, made a shocking statement to the media. In the statement, read by his lawyer, Adam said, "I can't remain silent anymore. I've always known that something was wrong. Gestures, glances, behaviors that made me uncomfortable. I left, not because I didn't want to be part of the family, but because I couldn't be part of the lie." These words landed like a bomb on the media and the Pawn Stars stage. For years, Adam's absence from the show had been explained as a simple personal choice, but now it was revealed as a quiet escape from a toxic family dynamic that he chose not to support. A few days later, John Harrison, Rick's ex-wife, who had completely stayed out of the media spotlight, released a video statement from an undisclosed location. Her face reflected the signs of a woman clearly affected, but resolute. She said that, although she was not a direct witness to the abuse, she noticed alarming changes in her adopted daughter's behavior, and Rick always had a reasonable explanation for everything. "I failed in my role as a mother because I didn't dig deeper. I believed those explanations because it was easier to believe them than to face the unimaginable." The most concerning part of her message was a specific statement. "For many years, I noticed Rick's manipulative behavior, but when you're inside, you don't see it as abuse. You see it as normal." These words were shocking and introduced a new theme of unconscious cover-up within the Harrison family. This unconscious cover-up had persisted for decades, as even those closest to Rick ignored the warning signs and emotions, trapped in the narrative of success and control. The consequences came swiftly when several members of the Gold and Silver Pawn executive team voluntarily resigned, including the CFO, the public relations representative, and even the chief legal advisor. These events marked the collapse of the protective system that had allowed Rick Harrison to maintain power for years, signaling the dawn of a new era where the truth was finally being exposed. The confidentiality agreements that Rick Harrison once considered ethically unacceptable began to unravel. History Channel itself suspended all international distribution of Pawn Stars, froze any outstanding royalties, and issued an official statement strongly condemning all forms of abuse while committing to full cooperation with authorities. The souvenir shops in Las Vegas removed all merchandise featuring Rick's image, and guided tours of his shop were indefinitely suspended for public safety reasons. Once regarded as a shrine to collectibles, the shop had now become a desolate place. Employees entered through the back door, refusing to make statements and avoiding the press. Loyal customers reported seeing empty display cases, lights off before closing hours, and an atmosphere that no longer carried the scent of history, but rather the smell of decay. The most symbolic collapse occurred when Cury Harrison, the son who had been seen as an accomplice, vanished from the public eye. He left his apartment in Las Vegas, shut down his social media accounts, and, according to investigative reports, attempted to leave the country. His current whereabouts remain unclear, but the court issued a monitoring and detention order at airports and borders. At the same time, the community that had once idolized the Harrison family began to unleash their outrage on social media, forums, and comment shows. Former collaborators of the show began sharing their own experiences. Contracts with non-disclosure clauses, restricted access to certain areas of the set, and strange behaviors that now took on a new, sinister meaning. An anonymous former producer from the channel confessed that Rick had a private area on set, a steel-walled office without cameras, and even directors were restricted from entering. At the time, it was considered a creative space. Today, this is being investigated as a potential scenario for manipulation or evidence destruction. The collapse didn't stop at just one individual. It was the fall of a legend, a brand, a family, and an entire industry that had profited from their image. The Harrison family history, once built as a legacy of pride, has now been dismantled piece by piece in just a few weeks. The most troubling aspect that many still can't digest are the signs that were there from the start: the evasive attitude toward testimony, the dark areas protected by contracts and reputation. But as so often in history, the allure of the spectacle was stronger than the current doubts. As the next phase of the trial awaits, the question that lingers is, what did you know and choose to ignore? If anything has become clear in this stage of the case, it is the silence. Rick Harrison was not just a famous figure. He became an accomplice if there was a breakthrough in his trial. His words, testimonies, and the growing suspicions can no longer be interpreted. They have become undeniable evidence. This opens the door to the hidden heart of his digital empire. While the television cameras broadcast priceless historical relics and artifacts, in another unseen corner, sealed with passwords, an entirely different story was being stored. A story meticulously documented in video clips, organized in files, and above all, articulated in the controlling language Rick coldly referred to as family time. The forensic investigation began months before the trial when the adopted daughter, after finally escaping the Harrison environment, handed over an external device she had tried to hide for years. A 2 TB encrypted hard drive with multiple layers of protection, concealed inside a fake compartment at the head of her bed. What was surprising wasn't just what the hard drive contained, but the truth it revealed about the dark secrets that had been concealed for many years. The contents of the drive were a mix of video files, audio recordings, screenshots, PDF documents, and folders with innocuous titles like Vacation, Daily Routine, or Shared Memories. One of the largest folders was titled Family Time. Inside, experts discovered over 180 videos, most of which were recorded from hidden cameras strategically placed in various rooms of the Harrison home. The distribution method left no room for doubt. There were cameras in door frames, behind mirrors, inside smoke detectors, and even in stuffed animals placed in the victim's room. The metadata of the files indicated that the recordings spanned at least 9 years. Technical analysis showed that many of these files had been reviewed, categorized, and edited by a single user account linked to Rick's personal email. The file names used a system of date codes and emotional codes, which the prosecution partially deciphered. For example, TF-1214-AL corresponded to Family Time December 14th, Lighthearted Joy, while TF-211 represented Family Time February 11th, Hidden Language Manipulation. This information confirmed a psychological digital power structure, which experts referred to as an emotional prison masked under the guise of education. In addition to the videos, a second key source was discovered. 4 encrypted hard drives found in Rick's private office during the FBI raid. After weeks of work with cryptographers, the final access keyword phrase was decrypted, an altered Bible verse from Proverbs 22:6, about training up a child in the way he should go. This detail was not only part of the moral symbolism, but was also confirmed by the prosecution as an example of manipulation and control. The documents found detailed the young woman's schedule, with lists of acceptable and unacceptable behaviors, accompanied by punishments for each action. One chilling example: if the victim broke eye contact during a meal, it was considered unacceptable, with a 48-hour isolation punishment. Everything was regulated, monitored, and measured like an experiment in an emotional prison. Screenshots of conversations between Rick and his son, Cury, were also discovered, in which they discussed adjustment strategies for the young woman. So more evidence and documents about Rick Harrison have been revealed, but this is just a glimpse of the deeper secrets yet to be uncovered. What do you think about these findings? Is there more hidden beneath the surface? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. If you don't want to miss the next shocking details, make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe to the channel to stay updated with the latest videos. One of the conversations revealed that Cury had tried the gentle but ineffective method and suggested a dual guidance method. Rick replied, "It's perfect when she feels like there's no way out, because that's when she'll understand that true love is what decides here." These phrases, though masked under the guise of education, were interpreted by forensic psychologists as mental manipulation and emotional coercion. The most powerful aspect of the digital analysis was the timing correlation between the recordings and the young woman's handwritten diaries. Experts compared dates, phrases, and background sounds. A video recorded on June 7, 2018, matched a diary entry. Today, I was told that I must learn to remain silent if I want to continue being part of this family. In the corresponding video, Rick's tone, both kind and firm, can be heard. Here, silence is not a punishment, but wisdom. The accuracy between the emotional records and the footage confirmed the technical findings. The abuse was not only systematic, but also documented, stored, and controlled with near-clinical precision. Expert reports introduced the term multisensory exploitation environment, referring to the level of sophistication in the control and abuse system that Rick had designed. In their final statement, the head of the forensic team addressed the jury. "We are not dealing with a case of negligence or occasional violence. We are facing a closed, structured, and meticulously planned environment where the victim endured constant physical and mental surveillance. This was an environment designed to reaffirm the abuser's power, with jury members requesting a moment of emotional silence when confronted with the revelations." The hidden cameras, encrypted hard drives, encrypted conversations, parallel punishment recordings, and files labeled family time revealed that the crime was not an accident, but a system maintained through technology and manipulated language. What was particularly disturbing was that the abuser himself had created this evidence to assert his power, turning the home into an emotional prison recorded in high resolution. As the trial entered a new phase, witnesses not only confirmed the technical findings, but also added a deeply painful human dimension. The coldness of the data was replaced by the warmth of broken voices and evasive glances. Gloria Mendoza, a former maid for the Harrison family, testified about the moments she witnessed the adopted daughter being locked in for hours or punished in silence without any clear explanation. She described a cold, hierarchical environment where Rick imposed strict rules, and there were areas that could not be accessed without permission. Brad Cummins, a former audiovisual technician for Pawn Stars, revealed that Rick had sought advice about a covert recording system for private use, citing concerns about protecting his daughter from intruders. The level of detail Rick asked for regarding the recording system and cameras was unusual, especially when he inquired whether cameras should be installed in private rooms. Rick's response was, "Anything that disrupts what's under my roof should be under my control." However, the most shocking testimony of the day didn't come from a person, but from a forensic recording retrieved from one of the seized hard drives. The 3-minute and 30-second recording was analyzed and verified by independent audio experts, shedding light on the chilling details of the control system Rick had set up. In the corresponding video, Rick Harrison's calm voice was identified by software as his own, accompanied by the pleading voice of a teenage girl. Although the full content was not made public out of respect for the victim, a portion of the audio was allowed to be presented to the jury under strict confidentiality. The jury's reaction was immediate, with 2 members requesting a break for health reasons. One of them, a woman in her 50s, left the room for 15 minutes to recover. Although excluded from the legal framework, social media quickly became flooded with leaked messages from journalists and legal assistants. The hashtag, #TheTruthAboutRick, rapidly became a trending topic. Within less than an hour, the public split into 2 extremes, one side skeptical, the other enraged. Some video clips obtained by the FBI were also shown, featuring Rick speaking to the girl in a domineering tone as he handed her a paper outlining the family rules. The remaining footage showed the young woman sitting motionless in the corner of the room for over 2 hours, with the fixed camera capturing her as if she were part of a behavioral experiment. The Attorney General used these clips to argue that the abusive behavior was not limited to physical contact, but extended to a system of behavioral submission, reinforced by technology, emotional language, and gradual isolation. The real crime was making her believe that everything was normal, that the prison she lived in was love. Finally, some text messages between staff members were discovered, containing subtle hints like, "Don't go in when he's in strict dad mode," or, "It's better not to look at that girl today." These indirect remarks suggested that many people noticed something was wrong, even though they said nothing. The courtroom became the place where these long-denied truths were exposed after many years. As the trial neared its final stages, Rick Harrison's image was no longer maintained through his own words, but through what had been recorded and confirmed by others. Cury Harrison, the defendant's biological son, took the stand to testify. No longer the comedic figure seen on TV shows, he was now a person standing before justice, confronting a brutal truth. Cury entered the room, escorted by 2 federal agents, his eyes red and wet, avoiding eye contact with the audience. Initially, Cury adamantly denied any involvement in the abuse, claiming that it was all just the emotional fabrication of the young woman. However, after 30 minutes, his arrogance began to fade. The Attorney General, with the calm precision of a surgeon, presented Cury with recorded conversations, screenshots, chat logs, and handwritten notes, suggesting his involvement in the control activities. Each piece of evidence gradually eroded Cury's defense, and the truth became increasingly undeniable. The digital recording revealed a segment where Cury Harrison, Rick Harrison's son, admitted, "Cury knows when to intervene." The notes indicated that the girl wasn't afraid, but she never doubted that she was special. When the prosecutor read a handwritten letter by Cury found in his personal journal, the jury listened in silence. The contents of the letter completely shifted the direction of the trial, with lines like, "Sometimes I feel like if she speaks, everything will get worse. But other times I think it's fair. I can't bear the guilt anymore, but I also can't imagine my life outside of this." These words were not just an admission. They exposed the pain and inner conflict Cury struggled with. Cury's voice was nearly impossible to articulate, and tears began to fall uncontrollably. He was no longer the heir to the Harrison empire, but a young man torn between regret, fear of punishment, and complete exposure before the public. The judge ordered an emergency recess when a juror started breathing heavily. The emotions in the courtroom became overwhelming, with shock, anger, and pain filling the space. Some members of the audience, relatives of the victims, embraced each other in solidarity. Journalists wrote in silence, too hesitant to break the somber atmosphere as the trial continued. Cury's defense team attempted to downplay the contents of the letter, claiming it was merely an emotional outburst and not an admission of guilt. However, it was too late. Public perception had already shifted when the clip of Cury breaking down quickly went viral, accompanied by the headline, "Rick Harrison's son breaks down." Cury's simple yet brutal words, "I allowed it to happen, I provoked it," marked the collapse of an illusion, the shattering of the family name as a shield. As Cury was escorted off the witness stand, no one spoke to him. No sympathetic glances, just emptiness. The entire courtroom suddenly understood that the darkness wasn't confined to one person, but spread like a silent, systematic family poison. The abuse was not an isolated event, but a lasting structure, where every silence mattered, and even the youngest, those closest to the victim, chose to remain silent. The final glimpse of Corey Harrison's public collapse was not just about emotion, but a symbol of an ending. It marked the beginning of a new chapter, where there were no more cameras, no more pawn shop, no more fame recycled into collectible products. Only the truth remained in the court records and the leaked recordings, which would forever be headline news worldwide. That moment was the moment Corey Harrison shed tears, no longer playing the role of a hidden accomplice, but becoming a witness to his own wrongdoing. The verdict had not yet been delivered, but the trial had already passed its judgment in front of the entire world. The scandal transcended the boundaries of the judicial system and became a global cultural phenomenon. A wave of outrage, analysis, and opposition erupted on social media, with hashtags like "Justice for Her," "Rick Harrison is guilty," and "Pawn Stars Never Again" dominating global trends for weeks on TikTok. Users began to dissect old clips from Pawn Stars, searching for signs of hidden control or suspicious comments, shedding new light on the scandal. One of the viral videos, with over 40 million views, pointed out how Rick Harrison abruptly cut off his son during a negotiation with a previously humorous line that now seemed authoritarian. "Here, the person who decides what's valuable is you, until I say otherwise." These findings sparked a deep debate about power, manipulation, and media construction within the Harrison family. Dozens of independent documentaries began to emerge on YouTube, delving into the history of the Harrison family and how the show was not just a business success story, but also a case study on power and abuse. One of the most prominent documentaries, The Price of Silence, The Truth Behind Pawn Stars, garnered 80 million views in just 10 days. This film included testimonies from former employees and forensic psychologists analyzing how the show functioned as a facade that hid abusive behavior. The fallout from the scandal was also felt directly at the gold and silver pawn shop. Hundreds of people left signs, flowers, and letters in support of Rick's adopted daughter. At the same time, other groups organized protests calling for the History Channel to permanently remove the show from its platforms. A petition titled "Remove Pawn Stars Forever" garnered over 2 million signatures in just 72 hours. A profound shift occurred in the entertainment industry. Production companies began to reassess their protocols for reality shows and family documentaries. The debate about ethical boundaries in entertainment, especially when involving public figures, was reignited. Reputation, once used as a shield against harmful behavior, was now questioned, with producers who once praised Rick now remaining silent or issuing cautious statements to distance themselves from the case. Social media and cultural discussions sparked a new phenomenon: a mass rereading of Pawn Stars. The public, now with a more critical eye, began to view the show as an unintended documentary on how charm can mask abusive structures. Several episodes were pulled due to containing references or jokes that, after the trial concluded, were found to be callous or revealed suspicious details. The debate extended beyond industry forums. Universities in the United States, Spain, and Latin America began using the case in workshops on criminal psychology, abuse, and media studies. The trial became a case study to understand how an abuser can construct, maintain, and reinforce a powerful public narrative to the point where even the victim doubts their own perception. The scandal had a significant impact on the franchise revenue of Pawn Stars. Retail products featuring Rick's image, such as T-shirts, mugs, and keychains, began to be removed from physical stores. The strong cultural rejection of these items led to a decline in sales, reflecting the shift in public perception and the profound effects of the scandal. The scandal extended beyond the legal realm, creating strong pressure on major online platforms like Amazon and eBay to halt the sale of all Pawn Stars-related products. Some stores in Las Vegas reported acts of vandalism targeting the show's promotional images. The Nevada Child Protection Committee proposed a bill called the Alejandra Law, which would require mandatory psychological evaluations for all public figures involved in reality TV shows featuring minors. The law was passed in record time, driven by strong public opposition and the profound impact of the Harrison case. The scandal became not just a legal controversy, but a cultural phenomenon. Feminist groups and victim advocacy organizations began using the image of Rick Harrison's adopted daughter with her consent as a symbol of resistance in the campaign From Silence to Voice. Amnesty International produced a video telling her story from the first-person perspective, which garnered millions of views within just 3 days. The Rick Harrison case became an uncomfortable mirror, a phenomenon that forced millions to reconsider notions of safety, normalcy, and respect in society. The Harrison family, a cultural icon for many years, crumbled before the eyes of millions. The Harrison empire, built on display cases filled with historical artifacts, TV cameras, and witty one-liners, now stood as a living testament to the fall of an empire. Rick Harrison was no longer the one defining value. He was no longer a star, but a criminal standing trial. The image of Rick Harrison leaving the courtroom in handcuffs, head bowed, surrounded by a crowd that once asked for his autograph but now responded with silence and contempt, became a symbol of the end. No statement or salvific speech could erase what had been recorded in the documents, videos, and the painful testimonies of witnesses, including his adopted daughter, Cury. This collapse was not just a legal outcome, but also a symbolic and cultural event. Since then, Rick Harrison has only appeared in leaked photos from mandatory psychological evaluations, under the supervision of federal officers. The face that once smiled in thousands of Pawn Stars clips is now a portrait of failure. He is no longer the young apprentice of the family business, but the second face of a closed power structure and silent complicity. The scandal not only shattered the Harrison family's defenses, but also dismantled the myth they had built. The media, once praising Rick as one of the most beloved figures on television, began to rewrite their narratives. Special programs like Pawn Stars, the story behind the legend, were taken off the air, and international networks replaced the show with documentaries analyzing the psychological collapse of the case. The location in Las Vegas, which had welcomed millions of tourists for over a decade, was ordered to shut down by the court after administrative violations were discovered in connection with the criminal investigation. The display cases were sealed, the artifacts confiscated, and visits were canceled. The gold and silver pawn shop sign was removed under police supervision to prevent vandalism. The Harrison family's television empire, one of the most profitable brands in modern entertainment, ceased to exist, marking the end of an era of storytelling that celebrated closeness, humor, and family, but in reality concealed control, abuse, and unlimited power. The end of the Harrison family was not just the result of a trial, but the dissolution of a media dynasty that knew how to turn reality into a spectacle, until the truth was exposed and led to its destruction. What seemed to begin with simple transactions of goods ended with the revelation of a truth hidden for years, causing an empire to collapse, not built on authenticity, but on fear. In that pivotal moment, no one in the courtroom dared to breathe normally. Everyone awaited the statement from Judge Malcolm Trenner, renowned for his calmness and legal precision. But even his usual composure couldn't conceal the rising emotions as he addressed the court. The judge declared, "This is not only one of the most disturbing cases I have ever presided over, but also one of the most fully documented and chilling cases of psychological abuse and systemic technology-driven behavior this court has ever faced." He went on to say that the damage caused had been refined, deliberate, and maintained for years under the guise of a model family and a globally recognized television brand. His conclusion rang out powerfully. "Today, we are not closing a case. Today, we are burying a legend. That of a role model, the perfect father, the screen icon, and we do this not out of anger, but in the name of justice." When the official verdict was issued and the case files were closed, a historic moment was recorded. For millions of viewers and victims, this moment was not just a legal judgment, but the final nail in the coffin of a figure who had lived for years on admiration while remaining silent. The day Rick Harrison first walked through the gates of the Federal Correctional Institution in Florence, Colorado, the nation no longer spoke about Pawn Stars. Instead, they talked about the worst collapse in decades of the entertainment world. No cameras waited for him, no fans, only a final, painful image of contempt and disgrace. With the collapse of the Harrison empire, Rick faced a fate no one could have imagined. A cold, bureaucratic reception. The man who once taught millions how to uncover the hidden value of objects now had to conceal the horror of the systematic abuse he had created. The decision to detain him without bail was due to the risk of flight and the potential destruction of evidence. But beyond the technical reasons, it was also a deliberate move to cope with the profound impact of his downfall. The first few weeks in prison marked a gradual collapse for Rick. He was placed in a special isolation cell with heightened surveillance, a category reserved for high-profile inmates at risk of aggression or self-harm. His cell was 3 by 2 meters, with continuous lighting and a fixed camera. The guards did not allow him any contact with other inmates, and all mail addressed to him was filtered. Any communication with the outside had to go through the Attorney General. Rick, who once controlled every aspect of his life, from the display cases to the editing room, now faced a new reality. No decisions to be made, from when to eat, speak, or sleep. According to medical reports, this loss of control led to a severe psychological breakdown. Initially, Rick requested to speak with his lawyer, asked for better treatment, and cited health concerns. But within those cold walls, his reputation was no longer a privilege. The guards' gaze no longer held admiration, but judgment. A few days later, Rick began to show signs of paranoia and breakdown, constantly shouting for the lights to be turned off and suspecting that the cameras had contaminated his food. He slept on the floor, covering his head with a blanket to escape the invisible gaze. Inmates' psychological reports described his condition as a gradual degeneration toward severe depersonalization, with episodes of dissociation and voluntary mutism. Rick was no longer himself. He refused to eat certain foods and spoke in fragmented sentences, as if answering questions no one had ever asked. When transferred to the inpatient ward, Rick spent hours staring at an empty corner, not requesting or demanding anything, just silent. The doctor's diagnosis was clear: accelerated institutional breakdown syndrome, a condition caused by the total loss of autonomy, particularly in individuals with a history of extreme control. The report stated that Rick experienced extreme paranoia, a sense of being constantly replicated by others, and an irreversible emotional disconnection. After admitting his actions, Rick's privilege to make unsupervised calls was revoked, and his contact with his family was severely restricted. His son no longer visited, and his defense lawyers reduced their communication to only occasional reports. This absolute isolation, combined with his psychological breakdown and loss of power, transformed Rick from a man once seen as a symbol of television success into a figure abandoned in the darkness of his own mind. Since his incarceration, Rick stopped receiving letters from anyone. According to staff reports, his prison mailbox remained empty for weeks. When he was finally allowed to walk under supervision, Rick would only wander around, muttering words others couldn't understand. Some inmates reported hearing him repeatedly say phrases like, "I wasn't there," or "I just wanted to take care of her." He didn't make eye contact with anyone, didn't speak to anyone. He silently moved like a ghost between the gray walls. Rick's physical decline was equally evident. He lost 12 kilos in 3 months, and his face aged a decade in just a few weeks. He began losing his hair and walked with a slight limp after an undocumented fall, which he refused to disclose. While no public reports were made about his health, sources indicated that Rick's condition was extremely fragile. What was most concerning was not the physical decline, but the absolute silence mentally. Rick didn't scream, didn't plead, didn't try to escape. He simply existed in a loop of silence, as if trapped in an endless episode with no script. What was happening to him was no longer a game, no longer an ironic form of entertainment. It was a real collapse, with no audience, only unedited, uncensored cameras. For many, this stage of the story was justice, but for others, it was an inescapable punishment. Rick's transformation from a famous star to a psychologically isolated individual perfectly mirrored what happens when someone spends their entire life creating stories, only to eventually face reality without a script. His story didn't end with a bang or a grand confession, but with a whisper. Rick Harrison, who once turned every object into a story and every silence into a dramatic pause, now lives his days in an undisclosed cell, without display cases, without editing. No more lights, no more applause, no more multi-million-dollar offers. In a leaked medical report months later, his final words were recorded as he whispered to a nurse, "I miss the noise." He didn't beg for forgiveness, nor speak of redemption. He simply admitted the one thing that truly defined him: a complete disconnection from himself and the world around him. These words were not only a poignant eulogy for a public figure whose credibility had been shattered, but also a symbol of irreversible disconnection, as an empire built on image shrank into an emptiness. This case is not just about punishment, but about how fame and motivation can become masks, hiding harsh truths. The silence of those who see but don't speak has the power to destroy lives. This story teaches us an uncomfortable lesson, that we must question the perfect stories we are shown and not let silence obscure the truth. If this story moved you, don't forget to save the video, share it, and leave a comment about what you've learned from the silence that is no longer. Because today, more than ever, justice is not just seen, but remembered.